They say time heals all wounds, but some crimes only grow darker with time. And for Setsuko Miyazawa, this couldn't be more true. On the morning of December 31st, she stepped into her son's home expecting a normal visit, only to stumble upon a nightmare that would ignite one of Japan's largest investigations. A brutal crime, an entire family wiped out, and a literal mountain of evidence that should have led to an easy arrest. Yet, more than 2 decades later, the case remains a mystery. But what makes this case truly chilling is that, unlike most killers who vanish without a trace, this one didn't. He stayed, ate at least 4 ice creams from their freezer, and even used their toilet without flushing. So the big question is, why hasn't justice been served? The answer to that lies at the end of this video. So, let's dive in. The family at the center of this chilling case is known as the Miyazawa family, a household of 4. Father Mikio Miyazawa, 44, mother Yasuko, 41, daughter Nina, 8, and son Rei, 6. They once lived in a lively Tokyo neighborhood filled with families. But as the city expanded and life became busier, many of their neighbors sold their homes and moved away, seeking quieter places to live. By the end of the year, 2000, only 4 houses remained in the area, one of them belonging to the Miyazawas. At first glance, their home looked like a single large house, but in reality, it was 2 attached residences. One side was occupied by the Miyazawa family, while the other housed Yasuko's relatives, mainly her mother, with occasional visits from her sister and brother-in-law. The family had already decided to relocate, as their land had been sold to the city for the planned expansion of Setagaya Park. However, Yasuko postponed the move, worried about how the transition would affect her children, especially Rei, who had a developmental disorder. As a dedicated tutor, Yasuko understood the importance of stability in education, and she even ran a cram school from their home, helping other children succeed. By all accounts, the Miyazawas were a close-knit, hard-working family, respected by those who knew them. But on the night of December 30th, 2000, everything changed. The morning of that day began like any other, with the Miyazawa family preparing for the upcoming New Year celebrations. Like many families in Tokyo, they spent part of their day shopping near Chitose Karasuyama Station, picking up festive supplies before returning home for a quiet evening together. They ate dinner, watched television, and eventually settled in for the night, unaware that their final hours were already counting down. What happened next remains one of Japan's most baffling mysteries, still debated and speculated upon decades later. But here's what we do know. Sometime after 11 o'clock that night, an unknown man made his way toward the Miyazawa home through the nearby Setagaya Park. Using a fence in the backyard, he climbed up to the second-floor bathroom window. Some reports suggest he may have also used a tree, as broken branches were later found nearby. Once he reached the open window, he removed the screen and silently slipped inside. From there, the intruder moved through the house, first entering the nearest bedroom, 6-year-old Rei's room. The little boy was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the danger looming over him. Unlike the rest of his family, Rei was not stabbed. Instead, the killer strangled him to death, leaving his small body lifeless in bed before moving on to the rest of the house. Keep in mind that there are some inconsistencies in what exactly happened after this. However, some reports suggest that Mikio Miyazawa, upon hearing a commotion upstairs, rushed to check on his family, only to come face to face with the intruder. In an instant, the killer pulled out a sashimi knife, a long, razor-sharp blade used for slicing seafood, and launched a brutal attack. Mikio fought back, trying to resist, but the killer struck repeatedly. Some sources claim that during the struggle, Mikio stumbled and fell down the stairs, where he eventually bled to death from multiple stab wounds. Others say the killer initially attacked Mikio downstairs, and as he tried to escape, he collapsed near the staircase, unable to reach safety. However, one thing is certain. Mikio's body was found at the base of the stairs with a fragment of the murder weapon still embedded in his skull. With Mikio dead, the intruder turned his attention to the last two remaining family members, 41-year-old Yasuko and their 8-year-old daughter, Nina. Both were asleep in the attic, unaware of the horror unfolding below them. Unlike the previous attacks, the details of their murders remain shrouded in uncertainty, but forensic evidence suggests that the killer crept into the attic and struck while they were still asleep. Bloodstains on the futon hint at a sudden, merciless attack. At some point, either before or during the assault, the killer discarded the broken sashimi knife and grabbed another weapon, a Western-style kitchen knife from the Miyazawa family's own kitchen. This new blade would be used to finish what he had started. In a desperate bid to escape, Yasuko and Nina tried to flee down the foldable attic ladder that connected the upper level to the rest of the house. But the intruder was faster. Their bodies were later discovered at the top of the second-floor staircase, huddled close together. It was clear that they had fought for their lives. Nina, in particular, suffered a fate even more horrific than the others. She had not only been stabbed repeatedly, but had also been beaten so brutally that several of her teeth had been knocked out. Forensic analysis later revealed the most chilling detail of all. Nina was the last to die. Out of the thousands of cases we've examined, this one stands out as one of the most bizarre and unsettling. A cold-blooded massacre of a family of 4, 2 parents and 2 young children, should have been where the horror ended, but it wasn't. What happened next defied all logic, earning this crime the chilling nickname, the Goldilocks murder. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Unlike most killers who flee the scene as quickly as possible, this one didn't. Evidence suggests he remained inside the Miyazawa home for at least 2 hours after committing the murders, moving about as if he had every right to be there. The exact sequence of events remains unclear, but forensic analysis paints a disturbing picture of what unfolded. After slaughtering the family, the killer strolled past their lifeless bodies, casually making his way to the kitchen. There, he raided the fridge, pulling out several tubs of ice cream, a bottle of barley tea, and, according to some sources, even a slice of melon. Then, without so much as a second thought, he started eating, mere minutes after the brutal attack. But what makes this act even stranger is how he ate the ice cream. Instead of using a spoon, he squeezed the tubs until the contents pushed up to the top, then bit directly into them, leaving saliva and fingerprints behind. It was as if he didn't care about being caught, or worse, as if he wanted to leave a trace. As he feasted, he realized he had injured himself during the attack, likely from the sashimi knife breaking as he stabbed Mikio. Instead of panicking, he simply grabbed the family's first aid kit, patched up his hand, and left the blood-soaked bandages in plain sight. This careless act would later provide investigators with a valuable blood sample, but he didn't stop there. He then made his way to the storage room on the first floor and started rifling through the Miyazawa's personal documents. Strangely, instead of taking anything of real value, he removed an entire drawer's worth of papers, carried them upstairs, and dumped them into the bathtub in the second-floor bathroom. The meaning behind this act remains unknown. And then, in what is perhaps the most unsettling detail of all, he used the bathroom to defecate. He left the waste unflushed, further contaminating the scene with DNA evidence. Afterward, he wiped his hands on a bathroom towel, smearing his own blood onto the fabric before walking out. Some reports suggest he then took a nap on the family's sofa, but this remains a point of debate. What is confirmed, however, is that at some point he removed several pieces of clothing, his jacket, hat, shirt, and scarf, and left them behind. Alongside these items, investigators found 2 handkerchiefs, a fanny pack, and a pair of black gloves. Even more shocking, both murder weapons, the sashimi knife he had brought with him and the kitchen knife he had taken from the Miyazawa's home, were also abandoned at the scene. Although the exact sequence of events remains debated, one thing is certain. At approximately 1:18 in the morning, the Miyazawa family's computer was turned on. According to system logs, the killer not only powered up Mikio's computer, but also created a new folder. Some sources even claim that he used the internet to visit the website of a local theater company, though this has never been fully confirmed. The sheer audacity of this act, calmly using the family's computer while their bodies lay just feet away, only adds to the eerie nature of the case. Later, investigators discovered another log showing that the computer had been activated again at 10 o'clock in the morning. Initially, police believed this meant the killer had stayed inside the house for nearly 10 hours after the murders. The idea that he had spent an entire night inside, moving around the blood-stained home without a care, was chilling. However, further analysis revealed that the second activation was likely unintentional. When Yasuko's mother, Haruko, entered the house that morning and discovered the crime scene, she may have accidentally bumped the mouse, waking the computer from sleep mode. If that was the case, the killer most likely left the house between 1:18 in the morning and dawn, reducing the estimated time he spent inside to at least 2 hours. But those 2 hours were enough for the case to become one of the most baffling and chilling cases in Japan's history. The horror was discovered later that morning at around 10:30, when Haruko, worried that Yasuko hadn't answered her calls, decided to check on the family. As she stepped inside, she was met with a nightmare, her son-in-law, Mikio, lying at the base of the stairs, lifeless. Overwhelmed with shock, she immediately called the police. When authorities arrived, they found not only 4 brutally murdered victims, but also a staggering amount of physical evidence left behind. There were fingerprints and shoe prints scattered throughout the house, DNA samples from the killer's blood, likely from the wound he sustained, and discarded clothing, including his own hat, shirt, scarf, and gloves. Both murder weapons were left carelessly at the scene, and in perhaps the most disturbing detail, unflushed feces in the toilet contained even more DNA. With such an overwhelming amount of forensic evidence, investigators were confident this would be an open and shut case. One former senior police official even remarked that the crime scene was a mountain of treasure and that everyone thought an arrest was just around the corner. But in the years that followed, this assumption could not have been further from the truth. The clothing left behind provided a remarkably clear picture of what the killer was wearing that night, even down to where he had likely purchased his clothes and what cologne he had on. Police determined that the suspect had been wearing a gray Crusher bucket hat, a white baseball shirt with purple sleeves, a cheap plaid scarf with no tags, a Uniqlo AirTech jacket, black gloves, and a gray and black fanny pack. The various footprints left at the scene also revealed that he had been wearing Slazenger sneakers, approximately 27.5 centimeters in size. With all this information, authorities created a composite image of the killer's attire to distribute to potential witnesses in the area. Once they had a solid visual of what the perpetrator looked like, investigators shifted their focus to the murder weapon and DNA evidence. In most murder cases, DNA is one of the most critical pieces of evidence, and the Miyazawa family's killer left it all over the house. From saliva to hair, blood, and even feces, his genetic makeup was scattered throughout the crime scene. While this should have been a breakthrough for the case, Japan's strict personal information laws complicated matters. Despite these restrictions, leaked reports suggested that the killer was likely between 15 and 35 years old, as he needed to be athletic enough to climb to the second-floor window. He was estimated to be between 5 feet 6 inches and 5 feet 7 inches tall, with a slender build, as indicated by the 32-inch waist belt on his hip bag. DNA analysis confirmed that he was male with type A blood, and the contents of his stomach, as revealed by his feces, suggested that his last meal consisted of string beans and sesame seeds. However, when police ran his fingerprints through their database, they found no matches, indicating that he had no prior criminal record. Now armed with extensive details about the suspect's clothing, physical traits, and DNA, the police circulated the information to the public in hopes of identifying him. Yet, as days turned into weeks, And weeks into months, no one came forward with a name. One of the biggest challenges in the case was that, despite the abundance of physical evidence left behind, most of it was unremarkable. The clothing consisted of mass-produced items, sold in the hundreds and available almost anywhere. The fingerprint evidence yielded no matches within Japan's database, leaving investigators with little insight into the perpetrator's movements or origins. However, two particular items, the suspect's shoes and hip bag, provided much-needed clues that narrowed the scope of the search. The first breakthrough came from the perpetrator's shoes. Investigators discovered that the 27.5-centimeter size Schlesinger sneakers he wore were never sold in Japan. Instead, they were exclusively available in South Korea. This revelation suggested that the suspect had either lived in or visited Korea at some point. Given that Korean law requires all citizens over the age of 17, as well as all visitors, to provide fingerprints upon arrival, the Japanese police collaborated with the Korean government to compare the crime scene fingerprints against their national database. Unfortunately, this search yielded no matches, once again leaving investigators at a dead end. The second clue came from the suspect's hip bag, which significantly expanded the scope of the investigation beyond Japan, leading all the way to the United States. Analyzing the bag's contents, police found grip tape used for skateboards, trace amounts of the men's cologne Drakkar Noir, and small particles of sand. Upon further testing, it was revealed that this sand did not originate from Japan, but instead came from Los Angeles, California. This revelation completely upended investigators' initial theories about the perpetrator, forcing them to reconsider the suspect's possible origins and connections. As time passed and tips continued to pour in, new discoveries emerged, each more puzzling than the last. Some findings helped clarify certain aspects of the case, while others only deepened the mystery. One such discovery came from a taxi driver who had been working in the area on the night of the murder. When interviewed, the driver recalled picking up 3 men near the crime scene. These men matched the general age and build of the suspect, and one of them appeared to be injured, even leaving a blood stain on the taxi seat before exiting the vehicle. This report raised an unsettling question. Could these men have been involved in the murder? However, this lead conflicted with key evidence from the crime scene, which strongly suggested that only a single perpetrator had been present. Eyewitness reports also provided another strange lead in the case. The day after the murder, staff at a medical center near Tobuniko Station, several hours north of Setagaya, reported treating a man in his mid-30s who had arrived with a severe hand injury. The wound was so deep that nurses could see bone. However, despite their repeated questions about how he sustained it, the man refused to give any explanation. His reluctance to speak made the encounter suspicious enough for the staff to alert the police. Adding to the mystery were 2 handkerchiefs found at the crime scene, one intact and the other with a hole cut in the middle. Initially puzzled, police turned to the public for insights. Responses suggested that the handkerchief with a hole may have been used to secure a knife handle, a common practice among fishermen handling large fish like tuna, as it improves grip. Others speculated that one handkerchief might have been used to hold the weapon without leaving fingerprints, while the other was worn as a makeshift mask. However, this theory raised a contradiction. Why would the killer bother avoiding fingerprints on the knife when he left them all over the house? These inconsistencies plagued investigators for years, stalling progress and reducing the chances of catching the perpetrator. Beyond the overwhelming evidence, a major challenge in the investigation was identifying a motive. The Miyazawa family was well-liked, had no known enemies, and no apparent conflicts that would warrant such a brutal crime. With no clear suspect, police were forced to examine every possible lead, starting with the most common theories. In most cases like this, the first assumption is a burglary gone wrong. However, multiple factors contradicted this idea. Typically, burglars strike when a house is likely to be empty, yet the attack on the Miyazawas happened in the evening when all family members were home. More disturbingly, The killer's first act upon entering the house was to strangle 6-year-old Ray, who was asleep and posed no threat. If robbery was the goal, the perpetrator would have prioritized searching for valuables, not immediately committing murder. In fact, the killer only made a weak attempt to retrieve valuables after slaughtering the entire family. Yet even then, he left most of the items behind or discarded them in the bathtub. Some sources suggest that the killer left the crime scene with around 150,000 yen, roughly $1,500. However, what truly baffled investigators was that nearly $2,000 in cash was left behind. This led police to believe that theft was not his primary motive. If he had come just to steal, why would he ignore so much money? Given the sheer brutality of the murders and the killer's complete disregard for evidence, many believe he was either a serial killer or someone with extreme psychological issues and violent tendencies. The strongest argument for this theory lies in the killer's behavior after the crime. Rather than fleeing, he made himself at home, eating their food, using their toilet, and even taking a nap in their living room while the victims' bodies lay nearby. This lack of remorse was chilling. Another unsettling detail was the level of violence directed at the women in the family. Yasuko, the mother, fought desperately against her attacker and suffered severe injuries as a result. Her wounds indicated that she struggled until the very end. Nina, the youngest daughter, was the last to die, and her body showed signs of horrific overkill. Even after she had passed, the killer continued to stab and beat her, breaking her teeth and causing massive internal bleeding. This excessive violence led some to theorize that the killer harbored deep hatred toward women, possibly suggesting a personal vendetta or misogynistic rage. With burglary and serial murder considered, the only remaining motive was revenge. However, this theory had a major flaw. The Miyazawa family was well liked, with no known enemies. Friends and colleagues described Mikio, the father, as a friendly and easygoing man who never stirred conflict. The only incident that stood out was a minor dispute days before the murder. Mikio had complained about a group of skaters making too much noise at the skate park behind their house. One of the earliest theories was that these skaters, angered by his complaint, decided to retaliate in the most extreme way possible by slaughtering his entire family. While this theory seemed outlandish, it did align with an early eyewitness account. A taxi driver reported picking up 3 men shortly after the murder, one of whom had a fresh hand injury. Investigators speculated that one of them could have been the killer while the other 2 acted as lookouts. This theory gained further traction when police examined the evidence left behind. The clothes abandoned at the scene matched the style commonly worn by skaters at the time, and the killer's hip bag contained pieces of skater's tape. However, when police interviewed local skaters from Setagaya Park, they found no suspicious individuals or connections to the Miyazawa family. The idea that a noise complaint escalated into a quadruple homicide was hard for both police and the public to believe. It seemed too extreme a reaction for such a minor grievance. Strangely enough, the most intriguing clue came from an unexpected source: grains of sand found inside the killer's hip bag. When analyzed, the sand was traced back to California, specifically to an area just north of Los Angeles. This bizarre detail raised a haunting question. How did sand from California end up in the bag of a murderer in Setagaya, Japan? The answer, some believe, lies in a controversial but crucial piece of evidence: the killer's DNA. Blood samples left at the crime scene allowed police to analyze his genetic profile, revealing something unexpected. The DNA suggested that the killer had mixed ancestry. His mother likely had roots in southern Europe, while his father had East Asian heritage. This revelation only deepened the mystery. Who was he? What was he doing in Japan? And why did he target the Miyazawa family? One of the most widely discussed theories suggests that the killer was likely military. Now, how do we know this? The answer lies in the sand. As previously mentioned, Forensic analysis determined that the sand found at the crime scene originated from an area near the Mojave Desert in California, specifically around Edwards Air Base. Theorists believe that the killer may have been stationed at this air base while serving in the United States military, which is where he picked up the sand found in his hip bag. Later, he was transferred to Japan, most likely to Yokota Air Base, which happens to be located just about an hour away from the Miyazawa family's home. For this theory to hold up, the killer, now presumed to be a U.S. military member, needed to understand Japanese. Evidence suggests he could read Japanese documents, allowing him to decide which papers to throw into the bathtub and which to leave behind. Of course, it's also possible that he randomly discarded documents, but this is where his mixed heritage comes into play. Some believe the killer was the child of a soldier who married a foreigner while stationed overseas. This could mean that although he may not have grown up in Japan, he learned the language from a parent and possibly visited the country during his childhood, making him familiar with the area and local customs. This theory connects multiple pieces of evidence. First, the idea that the killer was military makes sense when considering the physical strength required to carry out such a brutal attack. Investigators initially estimated the killer was young because of the level of athleticism needed, not only to scale the back wall of the house and enter through the second-floor bathroom window, but also to commit such a violent act. Second, the possibility that he was part foreigner would explain why there were no official Japanese records of him. However, his partial Japanese heritage would mean he was fluent in the language and possibly familiar enough with the city's transit system to confidently stay in the house for hours after the crime, knowing exactly how to leave undetected. Since this theory ties together several pieces of evidence, it has become one of the most popular explanations among both the media and online forums. However, it is not the only theory that has gained traction. Years later, journalist Fumiya Ichihashi proposed a different theory in his book about the case, arguing that the killer was actually a former member of the South Korean military turned hitman. According to Ichihashi, the company developing the Miyazawa family's neighborhood may have hired this hitman to speed up the redevelopment process. Ichihashi pointed to DNA evidence that strongly suggests the killer was South Korean, as the markers found were significantly more common in Korean individuals than in Japanese individuals. If the killer had served in the South Korean military, he would have possessed the necessary strength and combat skills to carry out the attack. Additionally, this theory provides something most others lack: a motive. While the Miyazawa family had already sold their land, they repeatedly delayed their move due to concerns about their children adjusting to a new environment. Eventually, they became one of the last families remaining in the neighborhood. Ichihashi believes this may have frustrated developers, prompting them to take drastic measures by hiring a hitman. This theory supports several key details. The military background would explain the sand found in the hip bag, while the DNA evidence aligns with the possibility of a South Korean suspect. It also accounts for the Slazenger sneakers worn by the killer, as the specific size found at the crime scene was only ever sold in South Korea. However, this theory leaves several critical questions unanswered. Why would a hitman linger at the crime scene for hours after completing his task? Why would he leave behind so much DNA evidence? Additionally, the sheer brutality of the murders, especially the fact that the victims were beaten and stabbed even after death, suggests a personal motive rather than a professional assassination. Another major issue is that the killer's fingerprints were cross-checked with South Korea's fingerprint database, and no matches were found. This means the killer was neither born in South Korea nor had he visited the country, unless he had somehow managed to evade legal biometric records for years. One of the most far-fetched theories was discussed by investigative journalist Nicholas Obregon on his podcast Faceless. According to this theory, the killer may have been a child or teenager. While this might sound unbelievable, some pieces of evidence lend it credibility. A particularly suspicious post on the anonymous Japanese forum 2chan, later renamed 5chan, adds to the intrigue. In a discussion thread where users shared experiences with animal cruelty, a self-proclaimed 13-year-old boy using the alias Mr. Koromutsu posted something chilling. "Now, when I see the happy family next door, I want to do something like that Oita family murder case. The closing date is December 31st at 11:59 p.m. I'm thinking about killing it off before the 21st century arrives." The Oita family murder case he referenced bore disturbing similarities to the Miyazawa family's case. In the Oita case, a family was attacked in their home at night, leaving 3 people dead and 3 others in critical condition. The perpetrator turned out to be a 15-year-old boy. The fact that the Setagaya family murder occurred just 2 days after Mr. Koromutsu's post has led some to wonder if it was more than just a coincidence. Because the original poster was never identified, there is no way to confirm whether he was referring to the Miyazawa family or whether he was even being truthful. However, the theory raises some intriguing points. If the killer was a minor, his fingerprints wouldn't be in any criminal database, making him much harder to trace. Some also point out that the last meal the killer ate, string beans and sesame seeds, is commonly prepared as a home-cooked meal by mothers for their children, possibly suggesting that he still lived at home. That said, this theory contradicts several crucial pieces of evidence. It does not explain why sand from Edwards Air Base was found in the suspect's bag, nor how a 13-year-old boy could possess the physical strength to scale a back wall and carry out such a violent massacre. Because of these inconsistencies, most people familiar with the case dismiss this theory outright. Despite the flaws in each theory, investigators have had no choice but to explore every possibility. With no suspects and no leads, authorities have had to grasp at any shred of information. In a desperate attempt to solve the case, police even offered a reward of 20 million yen, nearly $190,000, for any information leading to an arrest. This is the largest reward ever offered by Japanese law enforcement, fueling an extensive investigation that has continued for decades. With over 246,000 detectives and more than 12,000 pieces of evidence, this case isn't just big, it's one of the biggest in Japanese history. And yet, after all these years, not a single step closer to justice. Every lead, a dead end. Every clue, a frustrating puzzle with no solution. But that hasn't stopped detectives from trying, even if progress has been painfully slow. For 2 decades, Setsuko Miyazawa has refused to let her family's story be forgotten. Rain or shine, she's out there at Chito's Karasuyama station, handing out flyers, hoping that someone, somewhere, knows something. So here's the real question. Will justice ever come? Or will this mystery stay buried forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think happened? If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.